Yeah, say a little something about what happened in Hawaii under Cleveland's watch, as opposed to what happened under McKinley's watch.
Right. Well, so you had this issue of Hawaii, and essentially, Hawaii's hanging out there in the Pacific, it's a halfway point between China and California, and so you had American interests in Hawaii, and there was this fear at one point that the Japanese would take it over, and so then we would lose Hawaii. So, so you had these British and American sugar growers essentially there, and they were saying, okay, here's what we need to do. We need to take Hawaii back from the ruling class in Hawaii, the Hawaiian people, the monarch, and we're going to try to push for annexation to the United States. So they do it. They lead a coup, and they take Hawaii by force, and Cleveland refused to recognize it. He said, no, I'm not going to recognize the situation. This was essentially illegal. I don't think you've taken it, but I'm not going to recognize what you've done because that's not the American way. And of course, when he's out of office and McKinley's in office, they just codify what the American interests had done there by overthrowing the Queen and taking it through a coup, which they used the United States Navy to do it without the government in Washington knowing about it. This was a disaster in terms of foreign policy, and Cleveland recognized that and said, no, I'm not going to back this. I'm not going to support this. Whereas when McKinley became president, he did it, 100%.
Now, if I'm remembering correctly, there was agitation on the part of some Americans with regard to intervening in Cuba even then, even in the second term of Cleveland. And his response to this was to say that even if you were to go ahead and declare war and want to intervene in Cuba, I'm the commander-in-chief and I just won't call out the troops. Now, I've never heard of any president saying something like that, and that just bowls me over, that there was somebody who's saying that I, as the president, am going to be the restraining force when it comes to foreign policy. I mean, what is this, right? Some kind of crazy, bizarro world we're in. All right, I want to take the rest of our time, though, to talk about a figure that I think libertarians need to know about, even though he was not a libertarian, he was a conservative, but he's a conservative that, for the sake of cultural literacy, you need to know about him. Now, the average American has no idea who he is, so you can be culturally literate without knowing who M.E. Bradford is. But he saw what the neocons were up to before they even realized what they were up to. He, in that debate that he had with Harry Jaffa, was already putting his finger on how unconservative the neocons were, and what they were really pushing was a condition of permanent revolution, the absolute opposite of conservatism, and really the opposite of libertarianism. I mean, Bradford is a guy that libertarians ought to respect, because not only because he was a smart guy, he was a gentleman, but he was prescient. He saw what these bad guys were up to very early on.
Absolutely, and of course he was blacklisted by the Reagan administration for it.
Yeah, he was blacklisted all through the conservative movement, which is all you need to know about what a great guy he must have been.
Right, and Bradford, if you don't, he taught English, and so he was an English professor and taught the classics in Texas, and he was in so many ways kind of one of the last of what they called the Southern agrarians, and he wasn't. He wasn't that old. He died in the 90s. I think it's 1994, actually. But he wrote, and as you brought up Harry Jaffa, his main point was, look, okay, so we have this founding generation, and his book on the founding generation, and of course the Constitution, and he went through and looked at all the delegates to the Philadelphia Convention and talked about who they were, and this was fantastic. But he wrote essays on the founding generation overall and some different individuals in it, but what he essentially said was Jaffa is wrong because he's distorting the Declaration of Independence and this idea that all men are created equal and what that actually meant. In fact, he started differentiating between equality with a lowercase e and equality with a capital E.
All right, before you go any further, tell people who Jaffa is, because I neglected to.
Well, okay, Jaffa was a Straussian. He really is a nobody when it comes down to it. But he's a history professor, and I can't remember where he taught, but
I think it was one of the Claremont colleges on the West Coast, and when you say he's a nobody, you're not just insulting him gratuitously. When we talk about in the field, he's not held in high regard at all. It's only by his fellow Straussians that he's held in high regard, like as if he's writing Holy Scripture, but no one else really thinks much of him.
Right, that's exactly right. So, I mean, he's not Forrest McDonald or Gordon Wood.
No.
Yeah, he's not somebody that's written some great books on the founding era. He just had this idea that the Declaration essentially was a conservative document, and the principles behind it were really conservative. And so this idea of equality, this is it. But as Bradford pointed out, you can't do that. You're distorting what they meant by these things. And so he took him to task. And of course, this also led to a discussion of Lincoln. And this is where Bradford got in a lot of trouble, because he pointed out that Lincoln really wasn't a conservative. And all the neocons went bonkers over this. Well, how can you not call Lincoln a conservative? And he was. But as Bradford said, no, he's not a conservative in the American tradition. He's distorting, perverting this idea of union and the founding principles. And so, as Bradford continued to write, he really started articulating what the Southern agrarian conservative tradition was. And in fact, it's interesting we're talking about that, because Kevin Gutzman and I have been having this conversation today on Facebook about this very thing, which is kind of funny. But, what is American conservatism? Is it this Hamilton line all the way through Lincoln, which Jaffa would say, of course, looking at Jefferson's Declaration as kind of the basis of that in some ways, or is it something else? And Bradford would be on the side of saying, no, you neocons are wrong. You can't love Lincoln and really be a conservative. And of course, that led to his eventual ostracism from the conservative movement.
It's interesting, Brian, that Russell Kirk, who's sort of an intellectual godfather for conservatives of all stripes, said, I think might have been in his book, A Program for Conservatives, I don't remember exactly which one, that Hamilton does not qualify as a conservative because he was an innovator in so many ways, and conservatism is opposed to reckless innovation. But let me back up on Bradford and Jaffa a bit. Seems to me that, and we talked a little bit about this when we had Marshall DeRosa on the program, that's our mutual friend, and he's written a very good essay on nomocratic and teleocratic regimes. And that's really what this issue between Jaffa and Bradford boils down to, that Jaffa is claiming that the American regime is teleocratic and Bradford that it's nomocratic. In other words, Jaffa's looking at the Declaration of Independence and saying this is an ideological mandate for American society and for all societies, that society must be arranged according to the principle of equality. And what Bradford is saying is that, no, we don't have grand, overarching abstractions that begin with capital letters like capital E, equality. We just have a society here where people can live the way they want to live. Now, that sounds a lot more like the libertarian message than what Jaffa's saying. Now, a libertarian may say, well, wait a minute, I believe in equality. What's the problem with Jaffa saying that equality is the key to everything? The problem with it is, one of the problems with it is, that equality is one of these concepts that once that particular genie is out of the bottle, it never goes back in again. And your view of equality, Lincoln's view of equality, may not be the same as Hillary Clinton's view of equality, which may not be the same as Cornel West's view of equality. And each one of them will be saying, I'm simply trying to carry out the political, philosophical mandate of this country, and that means that I have to impose all kinds of egalitarian schemes on the society. It leads to a condition of permanent revolution. That was Bradford's warning.
Exactly right. And of course, that capital. It's hard to explain that to people when you say there's equality with a capital E and equality with a lowercase e. They don't get it. But what he's pointing out is, look, equality with a capital E. Essentially, if you want that, then talk about the French Revolution, because that's what that was. And so essentially, you're carrying that forward it's a perpetual revolution. There's perpetual innovation because you're never going to achieve it, and it's a moving target. And so when you have that, you're going to continually disrupt society and, of course, destroy everything in its path to get what you want, and you're never going to say you have it. And we see that now, right? I mean, look at what the central government is doing today. They're never happy with anything, so they keep changing, or as Obama simply said, remaking America over and over because it only fits within the confines of their head. This is what we have to have, and so we're going to do this, this, and this to enforce it. But then the next one comes along, and they do something else. And so there's continual disruption, and there's no peace in that. And I think that's the important thing about Bradford's position, and, of course, libertarian. It's peaceful. It's very peaceful, and I think that's something we really have to hammer home. This is not violent. The capital E equality is violent. What we're advocating is peace. Get along. You have your society, or what you think is great. We have ours, and just leave each other alone. What's so bad about that?
And of course, when you say that equality can never be reached, of course you're right. I mean, the classic example is the thought experiment that Robert Nozick gave about Wilt Chamberlain. He said that Wilt Chamberlain's a great basketball player, and let's say everybody began with equal incomes and equal wealth, but as soon as Wilt